So here's what we're building today. It is a dashboard with semi-realistic data about bakery sales. This is a beginner level course, and I have the data files available for you to download so that you can follow along. Everything in this module is free. If you want to take this a step further and learn about the concepts behind this design, to be able to recreate things like this from scratch yourself, I also have a part 2 course available. That part 2 is going to add another page to this design. That's more of a Stephen Few style dashboard, and we'll add row level security to the data model. So let's get started. Step 1 is going to be to download the data files. I have the link on the screen and in the video description. You're going to need Power BI Desktop installed to do this tutorial. So if you don't already have it, just grab it from the Microsoft Store. Just search for Power BI and install. And once you've got it installed, open up Power BI. Go to the Get Data menu and choose text/CSV here. Navigate to your files and just choose one of these to start. I'm going to start with employees. We're going to have to pull these in one at a time. Open, and from here go to transform data. That's going to be where we do our basic transformations. So here's what our employees data looks like. These are made up names and made up email addresses. So now we just need to load the rest of our CSVs. So I'm going to repeat this process, go to new source, text/CSV, and do the same thing for all the rest of these files one by one. All right, I've got all of my files loaded. So for our sales fact data, we have two tables. We have sales order lines, which is the one that tells you what items were ordered. And we have sales orders. So this is the sale event that happened. What's the date on it? Who ordered it? That kind of thing. So this is very typical structure for many, many things. So invoices, any kind of CRM data, you'll have what's called a header table and a line item table. I've intentionally included it as two tables so you can see one technique to make this into a proper star schema, because this is one of the things that trips up a lot of people, because you'll almost always want to filter your sales information by something on that line item table, like the product. So for example, how much cake did we sell by date? That order event is on the sales table. The fact that it was cake is on the line item table. What happens is your filters don't normally flow in that direction in your data model, and that causes all kinds of modeling inefficiencies. So the official way to address this, and I say official because SQL BI has promoted it. So the SQL BI people are amazing. You can pretty much take anything that they say at face value. What they say to do is to join these two tables, your orders and your line items, into a single table, and then you can put your dimensions in relation to that and make a proper star schema. That's what we're going to do here. So go to your sales orders table, then go to combine and merge queries. So when you merge the queries, there's a little submenu for it that is merge queries as new, and that's the one that we're going to use. So merge queries as new is usually your best default whenever you're joining tables, because it prevents a certain error that pops up all the time about not being able to directly access the data set. So we're going to merge queries as new. Sales orders, we are going to join with sales order lines. And to do that, we need to select the two matching columns, and that's the order ID. So select your order ID on your sales orders and your order ID on your order lines, and leave it on left outer. Click OK. And then we want to rename this table. So it's called merge one by default. We want to call it sales. So this is joined, but we haven't expanded our line item data into this table yet. So scroll on over to the right, and you can see sales order lines is a column right now. We're going to expand that out. So click on the double arrow icon in the top of the column, and I'm going to uncheck this use original column name as prefix because it makes the column titles a little bit less messy. And we're going to uncheck the order ID column because that's already in this table, and then click OK. So what this has done is it's combined our sales order data with our line item data. So now we can measure everything from one table. So scrolling through here, one thing that you want to be mindful of is any kind of total column that was on your sales table. So for example, this order total, you can see there's duplicate values in here. That's because we expanded those line items. So that order total amount got duplicated for each line. So we want to take this out. We're going to make our own order total as a measure by summing the line item dollar amounts. So remove this. I'm going to right click and remove. And removing that just reduces confusion. You don't want people using something that's wrong, right? So that order total column, if somebody sums that, it's going to end up with the wrong total. The other thing you want to do in here is check your column types. So the unit price and the line total are both decimals. We want to make those currency. So hold Control to select multiple columns, and then go to the Home tab and change the data type to a fixed decimal number. That's the currency. And if you're wondering what these previews are up here, those are under the View tab, so they may or may not be on by default. They're the column quality and column distribution checkboxes. They can help give you an idea about what's going on with your data before you load it into a model. So the last thing we want to do in here is disable those two original tables, the order lines and the sales orders, because if we leave those, we're basically loading the same data twice. So I'm going to right click on this and uncheck the enable load box for both, because we're not going to be using them and we don't want them to take up space if we're not using them. They will still get queried when the data refresh runs, but they don't get stored in the model. So go through and check the other tables and see if there's any currencies that need to be changed to a decimal. So it looks like our goal is a whole number, so that one is fine. But our product table has a few decimals that should be currency. So same thing, set them to fixed decimal. So we need one more thing in here. We need a date table. Date tables are very important in Power BI. They're what lets you measure things by any kind of date dimension you want. So your fiscal year, your fiscal quarter, day of the week, week of the month, all that stuff is a date table. I have a date table template. It's included with the data files. You didn't see it in the first part of the video because I'm adding it now, but that will be included. It's a text file because we're going to copy and paste the text into a blank query. So open up the date.txt file and copy all of the text in that file. And then we're going to paste it into a blank query in Power BI. This date table is somewhat based on the open source date table by Brian Grant. I've added a few columns to it and modified it a little bit. So go to your new source and then go to blank query and then paste in that text, but don't do it in this little tiny box. Go to the advanced editor up here, erase whatever's in this box and paste in your query text. Click on done. And here's our date table. So I like this one because it's got a relative date, relative year, relative fiscal year, all that jazz. Those are very useful. They let you hard code things to say last year or this year in your filters. Even when the year changes, it still gets whatever this year or last year is. So we're going to rename this table. So double click on it, call it date. And now we're ready to close and apply. So click that button in the top left corner. And you probably want to save your file at this point if you haven't already. And I want to point out that the references to the files that this is using are using the path on your computer. So if you move those files, Power BI won't be very happy with you, but you can if you go to the transform data window here. Each of these queries, if you go into the advanced editor, has the file path. So if you happen to end up moving the files, you might need to update the file path here. And as an FYI, you can also set this file path to something in SharePoint if you're trying to schedule a refresh on file sources. In this case, our data is static, so we don't need to schedule refresh on anything at all. But just so you know, I'm going to close this. So step one in any reporting process is going to be gathering requirements. So this is where you ask, what do we need to make? Why do we need to make it? What problem are we trying to solve? In this case, the audience for this dashboard is very broad, and all we're trying to do is figure out how our sales is doing. Is it going up? Is it going down? What are our top selling products? What are our busiest times of year? So that's what we're going to be addressing in this design. Step two is going to be modeling your data. So you should spend at least half of your time here and try to keep everything as organized as possible because, well, it does take more time to do that step. It also saves you more time in the long run when you need to go back and do things with it later. All right, so we've got our model. Let's see what happened in the model view on the left-hand side here. It looks like it's auto-created some relationships for us. Generally speaking, this is not what you want. You don't want to use the auto-created relationships. I'm just going to go through and delete these and recreate them from scratch. Okay, so we are making a star schema, so we want this to be roughly star-shaped. What that means is our sales table, which is our fact table, which has all of the information that we're measuring in it, goes in the middle, and everything else goes around the outside, kind of like a star shape. What we need to do here is connect the fields that are alike in both tables. So if I zoom in a little bit, our store ID needs to be connected to our store ID. So just drag one on top of the other. It'll pick the right cardinality by default just because of the way our data is structured. Same for product. So we want to connect the product ID to product ID here and employee ID to employee ID here. That's the person who made the sale. And then for the date, we're going to connect the order date to the date field in our date table. What tends to happen is that sometimes you'll have more than one date column on your fact table and want to use it with more than one relationship on your date table. I have another tutorial on how to manage that. I'm going to link it in the video description. And the sales goals actually gets related to our employees. It's not related to the fact table. So we're going to drag employee ID on top of employee ID there. So you can see this cross filter direction is defaulting to both directions because it's one-to-one, meaning there's one goal per person. You could join this goals data to your employees table if you wanted to, but that goals data is something that gets swapped out fairly frequently. So I feel like it kind of lends itself to being a separate table. So we're done with our relationships. Now we want to check and make sure things are somewhat functioning. So this is a rough check. We're going to do more of a thorough QC later, but basically just make a table, drop some stuff into it, and make sure that it makes sense. I'm going to close this filter pane so that I have more space. So drop in here something like, oh, I don't know, year and our sales line item total. Then maybe something from our stores table, so our store names, and something from the product table. Basically, pick one thing from each table, check and make sure it works, maybe category. So what we want to be looking for here is anything where you have the exact same values all the way down the column. That means something is wrong in your relationship. Also, make sure that any numbers make a ballpark amount of sense. And you'll also want to do the same thing for any measures that you create. So anytime you make a new measure, drop it in a visual or a table, make sure that it makes sense. It sounds obvious, but it gets skipped sometimes and it causes problems. So this looks good, but what I want to draw attention to are things like your date formatting. So for example, date or month. I'm going to go with month start date. So these are long date formats. Power BI always defaults to these long date formats, and it kind of drives me nuts. So go through, and for any fields that you plan on using, set your date format to what you want it to be. So I have this tendency to use month start date as more of a generic month field. So like November 2024, because I don't end up using the actual month start for anything. So I usually format that as just the month and the year. You'll probably rename this to month if you want to be specific because it's no longer a start date. And then for your date format, choose whatever the standard is at your organization. So a good default is the one that has the year first, like this with the dashes. But whatever the thing is that people are used to is probably the one to go for. So next up, we need to write our measures. I'm going to take our couple extra columns out of here so we can see what's going on better. So the one really important measure that we want to create for a sales dashboard is our sales amount. This will get reused all over the place, but we want to be organized with our measures. What I really like to do, and what a lot of other people like to do, is make a table that is specifically for holding measures called underscore measures or asterisk measures. You can't call it just measures by itself because that's a reserved word in Power BI. But here's how to do it. So I'm going to go to the Home tab and then go to Enter Data. Enter Data lets you just type in stuff into a table. And I'm just going to make this a blank table and call it underscore measures. The underscore is going to make this measures table sort to the top of our tables list, which I kind of like. And then we're going to load it. And if we open this up to look at it, it's got a column 1 in here, which we want to remove, but don't remove it until you put something else in this table because your table will disappear. So we're going to make our sales measure first, and then we're going to delete column 1. So with this table selected, go to the new measure button under table tools. We can call this sales or whatever you like. And this is going to be equal to the sum of our line item amount. So the line total. The line total already has the quantity times the price. So we don't need to do anything fancy there to get that. And then close our parentheses. So now we can delete this column 1 over here to keep it clean. So next, let's do a measure for counting our sales events. So how many sales happened in a given time period. So we're going to do another new measure. We'll call this count sales. And for this one, we actually need to do a distinct count because we joined our header and our line item tables. If we just did a count of rows, that would be counting the line items, not counting the orders. So we want to do a distinct count. Distinct count counts how many things are unique in a given table. And we're going to count the sales order ID. Close our parentheses. All right, so let's drop these 2 in our table, make sure they're functioning, 1 and 2. So these both have the default formatting. I personally prefer to have a 1000 separator on my numbers. So I'm going to select the count of sales and I'm going to click this comma button. This might be different depending on regionality. I know some countries use a period instead of a comma, so I'm not sure if the button looks different depending on your country or not, but add that in there. And then for our sales, depending on whether you ever need to see a fraction of a dollar, you may want to set it to only show whole numbers. This is very much context dependent. So if you're making a report for a finance department, they almost always want to see the decimals. If you're making a report for a sales team, they usually don't care about the decimals. It still uses the decimals in the back end when it calculates, but it only shows you the rounded number. So I'm going to set the decimal places shown to 0 here, and that'll make it so that anywhere we use this measure, it doesn't show the decimal. Let's talk now about custom sorting. So if I take out from this table some of these dimensions like that, and then drop in, for example, from our date table, our day of the week, you can see that the day of the week is sorting alphabetically. It's not sorting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That is something we can fix. So because our date table is awesome, it also has a day of week number column. So our day of the week column is a number. It's associated with a particular day of the week. We can use this column to sort this column. So if you select your day of the week column and then use the sort by column button here under column tools, and then select your day of the week number column, that will make it sort properly. We're going to use this later for one of our matrix visuals. The other place we can use this is for our month information. So I'm going to take day of week out and add in our month abbreviated and our month long name. You can see those ones are sorting alphabetically as well. If I add in our month number here, we can do the same thing we just did for our day of the week for the month. So select the month abbreviated, choose sort by column, and set it to month number, and then do the same thing for the month long name. So select it, sort by column, month number. This is the exact same technique that you'll see needed in a lot of places, like in survey data, where you want the responses to be sorted in a particular order, like strongly disagree at the bottom, strongly agree at the top, that kind of thing. Another design best practice here would be to add descriptions for your measures or columns. So that's done in the model view here. When you select any measure or column, there's a description field. You can create one with Copilot if you have Copilot licensing. You can also create these in bulk for your entire model all at once using TMDL. That's TMDL. I have a video on that. I'm going to link it below. This is going to be one of those things that AI is very helpful with. It's going to be kind of a thing of the past to manually type these in the very near future. Other things you may want to add are synonyms. So currently, I believe synonyms are still used for, say, AI and Copilot for people to be able to ask questions about your data. So you can add those if you want to. This is also where you add a display folder. So if you want to organize your measures into folders, you just type in the name of a folder here and it'll drop it into the folder. So for example, I could make one called primary and put all of my primary important measures in it. And you can drag and drop these from this view, but not from the other views right now. Something else you might want to do from the get-go is set up any report level filters. So this filter pane here has a section at the very bottom for filters on all pages. That is pretty self-explanatory. So anything you put in here is going to be used as a filter on all pages. So popular things to put in here are things like date, year, product, store, that kind of thing. So I'll just drop a few in here. I'm going to do like category and flavor, product, store name, and maybe year. All right, so I'm going to collapse this back down. Okay, we are finally ready to start on our visualizations. So it's totally normal for the data modeling part to take the longest amount of time, particularly if you're trying to measure things that are difficult. So if it feels like it's taking a long time, that's normal. But now we get to move on to the fancy stuff. So when you're building a report, it usually works the best to get your visuals on a page in a draft before you worry about how they look. That lets you move things around, swap out what you're measuring, get feedback, and generally change things without wasting a bunch of time. Once you have that basic design solidified, then you go through and make everything look fancy. I'm going to do this backwards today, and I'm going to go through and show you how to set up and style each visual one by one, because that format works better for a tutorial. It just lends itself to making things into chapters more easily. So just keep that in mind when you're building a brand new report. Start with a draft. You can wireframe if you want to, but oftentimes it doesn't actually save you much time versus just dropping things in a visual and dragging it around. But if you like to draw, that's fine. I'm going to delete this particular visual and we're going to start fresh. Maybe I'll rename this page. I'm going to do the matrix first because that one's kind of the easiest. So the matrix is this grid looking one with the blue sides in the visual selector. So we're going to use that one. And that was kind of in the bottom right corner here. And we're going to drop in here our count of sales. So that was our number of orders. That went into the value as well automatically when I clicked it. And then we're going to put our day of the week in our column as well. So along the top. And then the abbreviated month in the rows. That's going to give us a nice looking grid. And I'm going to turn the totals off. That's in the format your visual pane here, and just toggle the subtotals. And by the way, if your UI looks slightly different from mine, you might be using the on-object interaction interface. The time of recording this video, that one's still in preview, so I'm going to be using the standard UI. So this matrix looks okay. What we can do is we go back to the pane that had our fields in it. We can rename our abbreviated month to something that makes more sense in context. So for example, month day, because it's showing the month and the day. So next we want to format this visual. I'm going to go to the Format Your Visual tab under Values. You can set the alternate background color to white so that it blends in, and then search for the word padding. Increase that to maybe 2 or 3, and then set your border color. So it defaults to blue. We want to change that to something that matches our theme. So now is a good time to import your theme. So that's in this menu here in the View tab of the ribbon. Scroll down to the bottom and go to Browse for Themes, and then select the one that's included with the data file package, the .json file. If you want to edit anything about the theme, you do it from the same place. So it's just the Customize the Current Theme option here. So you can change the colors and the fonts there. So that's going to change our color options in this menu here. I'm going to set mine to like a dark green color. And then you might want to turn on the title for this visual. So that's under the General tab. Just toggle on Title. And then you have to give it a title to have it show up. So let's put in that there. So as an FYI, what I'm using for the titles of visuals is the Seago UI, but semi-bold. So I like the semi-bold because it makes it stand out a little bit, but not a ton. I feel like bold is too bold, if you know what I mean. So lastly, on this one, we just need to do our conditional formatting. That's back in the Visual tab up here under Cell Elements. You can turn on the background color. The FX button will let us change which color it's using. So for the lowest value, I'm going to use white. And for the highest value, I'm going to use kind of a softer green. So go with this one here. If you make this highest color too dark, then you can't see the text on it. And then you have to conditionally color the text in addition to the background, and it just gets kind of messy. I like to keep the lowest value as white rather than another color because it's more colorblind friendly. You get more of a difference in the intensity of color that's more visible to people that can't differentiate colors well. It's also just less busy. Let's click OK. So because we did our custom sorts on our month and day of week fields, this table is automatically sorted in a way that makes sense. Your days are in order, your months are in order. If we hadn't done that, this would be a mess. So it looks like our bakeries are the busiest during the holiday season and around the weekends. That's our insight from this visual. So let's do our sales amount measurements next. This visual uses field parameters. Field parameters are fantastic. They essentially let your report be more dynamic, where people can choose what they want to see things by. They're a really good just data exploration feature generally. One of our dimensions that we want to measure by was the salesperson name, which if you look at the employees table, we have a first name and we have a last name. We don't have a full name. I did this intentionally to show you concatenation. So in Power Query, in the Home tab, Transform Data, we're going to make our full name field. So on our employees table, I'm going to go to Add a Column, choose Custom Column. We're going to call this full name. And then we're going to double click the first name, do an and sign, and then a space in double quotes. So anytime you're trying to add static text, you put it in double quotes to make it a string, and then do another and last name. So that's going to take the first name and chunk it onto the last name in a new column. This is something that comes up fairly often with data coming from systems. The systems often have a first name field and a last name field, so it may or may not be automatically combined for you. And I want to put a little note in here about where these transformations should happen in an ideal world. So in an ideal world, all of your transformations should happen as far upstream as possible. That usually means in your SQL Server or in the process by which you are moving your data from one place to another. You have a step in there that does all your transformations before it goes into the database. If you are new to the data analysis world, you may or may not have access to A, do that yourself, or B, to the SQL Server that it lives in. So I wanted to show you how to do it in Power Query too, because you can do it here. It just might be a little bit slower when it refreshes. The same thing goes with joining the header and the line items. That's something that would typically already be done for you on the SQL Server end, but in many organizations it's not, and so you have to kind of DIY. So we're going to close and apply this, and now we're going to create our field parameters. That's in the Modeling tab. under new parameter, fields. I'm going to call this param dimensions. And we're going to drop in here anything we want people to be able to measure sales by. So that's our store name, our category of product, flavor, and our new full name field. We can change the name of these things as they will appear in slicers. I'll show you where to do that in a second. So I'm going to click on create. So here's what we've got. That field parameter is now a table over here on the right in the data column. Anytime you want to change anything that's going on with this field parameter table, you can just click on it and the DAX that is creating it will show up here. So if we want to rename these things, like I don't want this called full name in my report, I'm going to call it salesperson. We want these slicer values to be short, just makes it more user friendly. I'm going to take out the word name from this store here. If you ever wanted to add on new field parameter values, you can just copy and paste a row, just add a comma after one here. So for example, I could do this and make this something else that we're measuring by. I'm going to take that out and save. All right, now let's make our visual. I'm going to make it a stacked bar chart, but we're not actually going to use the stacking at all. I'm going to use the one with the horizontal bars because they tend to be more readable because the text doesn't get slanted at an angle or tilted to the side at all. It's easier to read. For our y-axis, I'm going to use our field parameter. And for the x-axis, I'm going to drop in our sales measure. Then we want to select something in our field parameter table so that it's actually functioning. There we go. So by default, this is going to be the old slicer in Power BI. If we want to get fancy, we can use the new slicer. So either the button slicer or the list slicer. The list slicer is better when you have a hierarchy of things, because it's got menus that collapse and expand like an accordion. In our case, our slicer values are flat, so I'm going to go with the button slicer. So if you select this and select the button slicer, it'll change the visual type. And we need to tweak this, obviously. So go to Format Your Visual. The button slicer already has single select enforced, which is what we want. For the shape, we can change it to rounded rectangle. And set the rounding to something lower because that's too big. I'm going to set mine to 11. And then under layout, I'm going to do single column and set the max buttons to however many values we have. So that's 4. The size of these buttons is controlled by how big the visual is. So if I shrink this down, the button size decreases. The padding on these things is a little bit finicky to work with. So usually you have to kind of adjust it a little bit, especially when you start making the button smaller. So instead of setting this to normal, I'm going to set it to custom padding and I'm going to decrease the top padding to maybe 2. That moves the text up a little bit. And then increase the left padding because it's really squished on the left side there, that it's maybe 20. And then set the bottom padding to match whatever the top is. The padding's taken care of. Let's move on to the colors. So we're under the buttons section again. I'm going to change our border colors and make it maybe a light gray. So this one here. And then if we want the one that's selected to have different settings from the rest of it, we can go up here to the state. And then for the selected state, change those. So for that, we can change the color of the fill on the one that's selected. Make it a light green. And the text on that needs to be darker now, but I'm going to set the border first. So make the border 2 pixels. And then the text is in a different section. So it's under callout values. Set the state there to selected also. And under values, you can set the font color. So I'm going to set mine to black for the selected button. Our title on this is lame, so let's change that. It's under the general tab, under title. I'm just going to put in here the text top. That implies that somebody should select something to see the top whatever. So now if we try out our buttons, they are swapping out the axis according to what we've selected. So next, let's work on our bar chart design. From a design perspective, you generally want the numbers that are associated with something to be as close to wherever the person is looking. So in this case, probably at the end of the bar as possible. So that means using data labels. And we're also going to turn off the axis labels because it should be obvious what people are looking at because they've selected something in this slicer over here, right? So they don't need to know that this is the store because they've clicked it. So let's turn our data labels on first. Under the Format Your Visual, we're going to search for data labels. Turn them on. Make this a little bit wider. If you prefer them to always be on the inside, you can set it to inside end and turn off all the axes stuff. So I'm just going to search for axes. I want to leave the Y values on, but turn the title off and then turn off the X axes values and the X axes title. We can probably also turn off the title on this one because it's kind of obvious what it's showing. It's the sales dashboard, it's showing the sales amount. It also shows up as the hover text. So I'm going to go to general, turn the title off. So next we're going to do our color highlighting for the top bar. It draws attention to whatever that top category is. I'm going to use a visual calculation for this since it's only going to be used in this one visual. It just keeps the model cleaner. So I'm going to select the visual and then go to the modeling tab in the ribbon. And then where it says new visual calculation, we're going to choose custom. Our calculation I'm going to call color. I'm going to say if our sales is equal to the max X. So max X is an iterator. So whatever the top row in our visual is by sales amount of our rows. Oops, not row, rows. Sales. So if it's the top sales row, then color it green. I'm going to just use the hex code of the green color in our theme. Put it in double quotes. It's hashtag 00C385. Close the quotes and close this if statement. I'm going to hide this calculation, but we're going to use it in the conditional formatting. So click the eye icon next to your color measure and then go up to format your visual. And under the general tab, go to data format and select color from the apply settings to drop down. Change your data type to text. My understanding is that this is going to be fixed eventually, so you won't have to do this step in the future maybe, but for now we want to change this to text because the color is not a number, it's a text string. So with that done, go back to the visual tab, go to bars, and for the color, use the FX button, and for the format style, choose field value. Field value is going to be the color fields that we just created here. Then click OK. So you can see that changed our top bar to a nice green color. So when you're done here, you can go back to the report. Visual calculations are not yet supported in the publish to the web functionality of Power BI. So what that means is if you're trying to make a portfolio out of this, you want to use some alternate DAX. But I wanted to show both techniques because visual calculations are the wave of the future. So if you are planning on using publish to the web for your report, what you want to do instead is create a measure on your measures table that will return the color that you want for the top row for the selected measure from your field parameters table. This is significantly more complex than visual calculations. So I'm going to paste in the code and we're going to go through what it does, but I included the code itself in a text file in the course files. So you can copy and paste from there if you want to. I'm going to go to new measure and paste in our code. Essentially what this is doing is for whatever you have selected in that field parameter slicer, so whether that's the store, the category, the flavor, or the salesperson, it's getting the top row for that selected dimension. And then for each of the values of each of those dimensions, it's checking to see if the current one is the same as that top one. If it is, then it returns green. Otherwise, it returns the default color for the visual. So there's our if statement in the return down here. So we can use this measure in the formatting for a bar chart. So when I select the visual, go to format your visual under bars, under color, use the FX button to choose field value from the categories. And for the field to base it on, just choose the measure that you just created. So that's this one here, our alternate top category color, and click OK. And then your top bar is colored. So this will work in publish to the web reports. It's much faster to just get the top, whatever is selected. It's much faster to use visual calculations. Right, onto our KPI card. Our KPI card uses the new card visual. That's the one with the lightning bolt and the 1, 2, 3 here. And if you're looking for different styles of KPI cards, I have a YouTube video that I will link. It has some various different looking options. Today we're going to do the gray one, which has a trend line as well as a change percentage that is conditionally formatted with an arrow and red or green if it's up or down. Design-wise, if you're going to be doing a KPI, you need to give some context about that number. Is it changing? Is it going up? Is it going down? How much is it going up or down? Try not to just do a number in a card. I know it's faster, but it's not as valuable as including context with your numbers. So for our card, we're going to drop in our sales measure. There's our sales amount. Then if we want to get the percentage change, we need a couple of measures. So how you design this depends on whether or not you're going to be reusing certain things. So to do this, we need to get our current year sales. Are you going to be using current year sales in multiple places, in multiple visuals, in multiple reports? If yes, you should make a measure for it. If no, you can use variables inside the measure. In this case, I'm just going to create explicit measures for each of these things, just because I feel like it makes it more clear. So we're going to make a new measure on our measures table. We're going to call this current year sales. This is going to be equal to calculate sales, so our sales measure that we created earlier, and then do a comma, And then we can add filters. So there's a few different ways to add the filters. You can just put your field equals your value here, or you can use keep filters if you want to be fancy. So keep filters is a good habit to get into. This is a trick I picked up from SQL BI. They're the authority on DAX efficiency, so keep filters is more efficient. And then we need our year filter in here. So normally what you would use here, if you're working with live data, is a relative year. So relative year 0 is the current year. Last year is -1, next year is +1. This data is static. If I do that, it's going to return 0 because there is no data for the current year. So I'm just going to use an actual year number. I'm going to use the year field from our date table. Again, use the relative year if you have a live data set. And I'm going to set that equal to year equals 2024, close the parentheses, and hit the checkbox. So that's our current year sales. Now we need to get our last year sales. I'm just going to copy and paste this whole measure. I'm going to do a new measure. I'm going to rename this to last year sales and set the year filter on it to 2023. Now, if we want to get the change between those 2 years, we can do one more measure. Sales change versus last year. I'm going to put a percent on here because it's a percentage. So our data label is going to use this measure. We're making it separate so that we can also use it for the conditional formatting. So this is going to be divide our sales current year minus sales last year, the comma. So we're going to divide that by our sales last year. Now we need one more to do the data label. So we're going to do new measure, call it year over year label, and I'm going to use variables this time. So we're going to do var for variable. We're going to get the percentage change. That is equal to our measure we just created. And we're going to do another variable for the triangle icon. So this is the one that's up if it's positive, down if it's negative. This one we're going to use a switch. So a switch is like an if statement, but it can handle more cases. So I'm going to do switch true, then do comma, and then put in our cases. So we're going to check the percentage change multiple times. So that's why we did it in variables. We can reference what that calculation came out to without recalculating it multiple times. So we're going to check the percentage change, and if it's greater than 0, we're going to do a unit char 9650. That's the up arrow. There's all kinds of cool characters you can reference like this, by the way. So if you want to get like stars or symbols or any of that, there's websites that have a reference to all the codes online. There's our case 1, do a comma. Now we're going to check our percentage change. And if it's less than 0, return a unit char 9660. Then for our last case, it's just going to be if neither of those are true, we're going to return blank. So I'm just doing double quotes and close our switch. Lastly, we need to return our data label. So we're going to use return. We're going to turn our triangle, whatever the triangle happens to be, and an and sign, and a space and double quotes. And we're going to format our percentage change. So when we're combining text and a measure, it drops any of the formatting that you have set for your measure. So we need to reformat it with DAX. So we're going to format the percentage change. We're going to multiply it by 100. Go to no decimal places. That's a 0. And tack on a percentage sign. So there's multiple ways to do this. There's a format string for it too, I think, but it's easier for me to remember this way. All right, so I'm going to swap out the measure that we're using here. So I'm showing sales for all time here. I'm going to drop in our current year sales instead. And you can see that the formatting on this leaves something to be desired. We don't need that many decimals. So just set it to however many you want. I'm going to go with 1. And then we're going to open up the Format Your Visual tab, go to reference labels, and we're going to drag in our year over year label that we just made. So it's not colored yet. We're going to do the coloring in a second. But first I want to turn off the divider while we're in here, as well as the border. Where's the border? All right, turn that off. Now back in our reference labels, we can select that one that we just created, the year over year, and we can change the title of it. So it defaults to the field name. You can set it to custom and make this change versus last year. So now let's make a measure for the color. I'm going to do new measure. This one's pretty straightforward. Call this sales year over year color. And similar to the last one, we're going to do a variable. We're going to do percentage change, set that equal to our percentage change measure. So for our return, we're going to do another switch like last time. So switch true. We're going to say if the percentage change is greater than 0, return good. Double quotes. So good references the good color in our theme file. That way we don't have to remember the hex code for it. If the percentage change is less than 0, then we want it to return bad. Or else, I guess we can have it return black if it's not greater or less than 0. So that would just be pound sign and 6 zeros. Close your switch. So now we can use this as our color for our label. So back under reference labels, if we go to our value, we can use this FX button next to color to set the color of the value. So there's two conditional color options. There's one here and one here. This one sets the label that's in front of the number. This one sets the number itself. So we're going to use the one under value, set it equal to field value, and base it on, under all data measures, our year-over-year color measure. Click OK. So a few more things to wrap this up. And under callout values, I'm going to set the label to be a little bit bigger. I want this to match the rest of our visuals. I think it was 14 size and then semi-bold font. And then we need to change the positioning of it. So it's in the center right now. We kind of want it to be more towards the top of the card. So under cards, there's a setting for padding. I'm going to set this to custom and give it some more padding on the left, maybe 20. And then down here, you can set the bottom padding to something really high and it'll shift all of the content up. So now we need our trend line, but I kind of want to have our background cards in here so that I can position it properly. It's kind of hard to do that when the background is white. So I'm going to click on the canvas, so some empty white space, and then go to format your report page and change the canvas background color. This isn't a color that I have in my theme. It's a very particular shade of gray. There's a pound sign, F5, F5, F5. It's a really nice, very light gray. This defaults to 100% transparency, which means you can't see it. So dial that way back to 0. And now you can see what we're dealing with. So we need to set some transparency on some of these things and add in our little cards. What I'm doing in this report design is I'm putting cards behind the visuals to give them some visual separation. This helps the eye kind of relax and lets it focus on different parts of the dashboard without as much noise coming from other directions. So there's a few different ways to do this. You can either embed your cards in the background or you can just insert shapes in Power BI. I'm going to do inserting shapes today to keep it simple, but doing the background image is also completely legitimate. So I'm going to do in the insert menu, go to shapes, and I'm going to do square cards. Feel free to go slightly rounded if you want to. Under style, set the color to white. And then for the border, we want a very subtle border. So if I look at this right now, that's a little bit too harsh. After trying a few colors, I went with this white 10% darker color. That gives a nice subtle feel. So with these cards, you can, under the Format tab, send backward, send to back. We'll send it all the way back. Then when you click off of it, you can kind of reposition it how you need it. I'm going to leave a little bit of space for our title at the top of this page here and move this down. And once you have one of these set up, you can just copy and paste. So I'm going to copy and paste my shape and then just resize it for down here. So you can see I really need to readjust all of these. So I'm going to have one shape that holds both the slicer and the visual. So one of the design rules is that, generally speaking, proximity makes people assume that things should be used together, which is what you want here. You want people to use your slicer with your visual. So if you group them together, people are more likely to do that. If you get things kind of close, you can also use the arrows on your keyboard to nudge them slightly in the right direction. And for this bar chart, we'll turn the background off, and then I can make the bars go slightly closer to the end of it. The same for our matrix. I'm going to send it to the back, then pull this to fit. These buttons look a little big, so I'm just going to squish them down a little bit. All right, we're ready for our spark light on our card. So that's just a line chart. I'm going to drop our sales in here. And then for our time series, I'm going to use the month start date, or also called month since I've renamed it. If you drop date in here, it tends to be too spiky, up and down and up and down, up and down, right? So if we format this, we want to remove the grid lines and all of the axes stuff, because this is supposed to kind of fade into the background of our KPI card. So I'm going to search for the grid lines, turn those off, and then under axis, turn all that off. So the values and the title. And same for the Y. And you can choose if you want to have a smooth line, so that's under the lines section. You can set the interpolation type to smooth if you want a smooth line. I'm going to set the color on this to black. And we can turn on shade area, but dial up the transparency quite a bit. I'm going to turn off the title, so that's under the General tab, title off. Now we can kind of maneuver this into place on our card. So eventually these spark lines will be part of the card visual is my understanding, but they're not right now. So we need to kind of DIY. I'm going to make the background on this transparent and then kind of size it up just a little bit. Just make sure your text doesn't overlap with your line. That looks pretty good. All right, we are on to our last visual. So that was a comparison for the months of the year. I'm going to use just a basic clustered column chart here. It needs to be clustered because we're going to stagger the bars so that one is in front of the other one. I'll just add a card behind this before I forget. So copy and paste one of your cards and stick it behind that. For this, we're going to use our primary sales measure here. Oh, and it looks like I need to rearrange the other measures we just made into our folders. Keep it clean. I'm going to put the color and the label into a visuals folder. And then drop the rest of these into the primary. Drop your sales in the y-axis, and we're going to use the abbreviated month. So the abbreviated month, because the text is so short, it's not going to shift the text to diagonal like it does when it doesn't fit. And then use the year as our legend. So we need to set the colors for this. It's defaulting to the green for the current year, which we need to change. So in the format your visual, we're going to go to columns, and for the 2023 series, I'm going to set that to light gray. And for 2024, I'm going to set that to black. So these loosely follow IBCS colors. This is something that I talk about in the part 2 course, but essentially gray is past, black is current. Under columns, set that back to all. And under layout, turn on overlap. Then you can dial up the space between series to maybe 40%, and that'll give you that bar overlap. So we're going to get to the green up and down percentage change colors in a second. I'm going to turn off the grid lines and the axis labels first. Now we need to do the percentage change. This works a little bit differently because of the context that it's being displayed in. We can't reuse the same measures we created earlier. So very similar in concept, but slightly different DAX. I'm going to do 3 new measures again. We're going to do one that's getting the percentage change. Call it same period last year, percentage change. So because we have the legend values on our visual, we don't need to include the year filters on here in the same way. So I'm going to do 2 variables, one for current, one for last year. This one's just going to be equal to sales. Last year sales is going to be equal to calculate sales, same period last year. So same period last year is going to make it so that you can use the same measure with different date axis types. So you could do it by week, month, year, so on and so forth, quarter, whatever. And we're going to put our date field in here from our date table. And I just realized that we haven't marked our date table as a date table, which we need to do for these time intelligence functions. So I'm going to do that in a second, but I'm going to finish this measure first. So we're going to return, divide the current sales minus last year sales by last year. Make sure to use the ones that are your variables, not your measures from earlier. So here's our measure. Now we need to set our date table as a date table. So select your date table in the data pane and go to the ellipses menu next to it and check the mark as date table option in that menu. So we're going to turn it on, choose a column, date, save. This is required to use all of the time intelligence features in Power BI. We need another measure to make the label with the up and down arrows. I'm going to set a variable of change percent equal to our same period last year percentage change. And for our triangle, we're going to make a switch, true. If the change percent is greater than 0, unit char 9650. If it's less than 0, (9660) else blank. Then return our triangle, space, and format our change times 100, 0 decimals, and add a percent sign. All right, one more for the color. Similar to last time, we are going to check the percentage and then return a different value depending on whether it's greater or less than 0. So switch, true, and if our percent change is greater, then good, just like before. And then return 6 zeros and pound sign. If not, that's the color black, and close your parentheses. All right, we're ready to go. Let's stick this in our visual. So we're going to turn our data labels on, and then we want to turn it on for only one of these series. We don't want it on both. So I'm going to go to the 2023 year, and set the show for this series to off so that we don't have it doubling up. And then swap this back to all. And if you're doing this on a report that has more than 2 years worth of data in it, make sure that your visual is filtered down to specific years. So when you select this visual, you get a year drop down as the filters because we're using it in the visual. So if you change this to basic, you can see all of the years in our date table. So you can select just the 2 years that you want to compare here. You could also use a relative date column for this, so -1 and 0 for current and past year. Let me change the title on this. We're gonna call this sales versus same period last year. And back to our data labels on the visual tab, we need to show the label measure that we created. So under value here, you can just drop in your change label value to replace what was showing. Then we need to conditionally format it. So that uses the color and the FX button here. And for the field to base this on, I'm going to search for the word color and hit enter because I made this measure so long that I can't see the whole thing and there's no tooltip when I hover on it. So it's this one here, the sales same period last year percentage change that shows up when I search for the word color, click OK. And that made our red and green colors show up. So we're pretty much done at this point. We can add a title to this dashboard if we want to, and then just take a quick look at our spacing and make sure it's perfectly equal. So it seems like it's a little bit off right now. So for example, I could shift these two up a tiny bit. And spacing things in Power BI is tricky because you'll notice when I'm pushing the up and down arrow on my keyboard, it's actually shifting left and right as well. That's very special. If you want to be perfectly precise, there are, if you select just one of these under properties, a specific position with pixels. So you can specify this with pixels. You just have to do the math as far as spacing them perfectly. So I'm gonna add a text box for the title on this, make the font quite a bit bigger and set the background color to off. So the icons I get from Google UI icons. So if you search for Google icons, these material symbols icons. So there's one for like this one here. It's called monitoring. You can change the size on these. So I can like make it much bigger and set the color to whatever you want and then export it as an SVG or a PNG. PNGs are a little bit easier to work with because you can import them as pictures, whereas the SVGs you need to use as a button background right now and it's kind of awkward, but either will work. And then back over here, we're gonna go to insert image, insert that picture and resize it. So before you call this finished, take a run through and make sure that all of your titles are aligned visually. So sometimes you get marker lines for this and sometimes you don't, but generally speaking, you want them to be at the same position all the way across. This one needs to go up a little bit maybe. And same thing for your card spacing. Okay, so our dashboard is done. If you want to take this one step further and add a second page that has sales progress to goal at an individual level that we add row level security to, check out my course. Otherwise, thank you for watching and I hope you have a great day.